Yeah, welcome. So Dan is going to speak about wax and wax processing and candles and um, that type of thing. So Dan, let's.
Great.
I think I've made a few. I don't know if you have a presentation, but you should
Yeah, I
have
have
access to
some slides I'll show, and maybe a little bit of show and tell into the camera here. Yeah, so I am. It's fun to be here. I've been kind of avoiding going onto Zoom meetings as much as I can over the last year or so. It's just like it just reminds me of work too much. But I was really hoping to be able to do this presentation in person, but oh well. That's okay. But it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces here. So I actually did a presentation similar to what I'm about to do to my colleagues at work. Once a week, we sort of take turns doing a non-technical presentation, which is sort of fun. So I thought I would do an earlier draft of this, a little bit less technical, to my colleagues, so that they understood a little bit about what it's like to deal with beeswax. And most of them, their their reaction was, wow, it's so complicated. So I do want to mention this. Oh, also feel free to do the little hand raising thing if you have a question while I'm in the middle of talking, just so I can stop and see that you're interested in doing that. And let me just get my screen going here. Okay, now let's see if I can also see what, is that gonna work? Well, okay, I think I'll be able to see when people are raising their hands. Okay, so I decided to actually define what gunk is because I had put that my slides. Some of the people in my company aren't native English speakers, and I thought, well, let's make sure they understand what the word is. Yeah, so let's get this. First, just a little bit of context, because I didn't realize this until I did a little research. But here's where wax actually comes from. So. When honeybees are between 12 and 20 days old, they develop this special wax-producing gland in the abdomen, and it converts sugar from the honey into a waxy substance, and it deposits these flakes on the abdomen. And then these small flakes are collected by the other bees and chewed in their mouths. So kind of think of chewing gum, I guess. The bees then add these pieces of wax to the wax foundation that we've started, or of course in the wild, or if you go foundationless, then you just start from scratch. But it's kind of cool to see that photo of where it comes from. So I'm sure almost everybody here is familiar with these images. But basically, yeah, the wax, almost all the wax comes from the capping left over from when you harvest the honey. You generally don't want to mess with the foundational wax. And after removing the honey from the comb, using the spinner and so on, I really try as much as possible to return the comb back to the hive so they can continue using it. Because I think I can't remember what the statistics are. Wax is the amount of energy it takes to make beeswax compared to making honey. You really want to keep that, maximize the amount of wax that gets reused. So I will point out, just like beekeeping advice, everything is just my opinion. And if you ask 10 beekeepers how they deal with beeswax, you'll get 11 answers. How I do it. So this is trying to kind of collect the main list of equipment here, but you want some stock pots. I just go over to Goodwill or Salvation Army, find some of those things. I've managed to find some decent double boiler things. Sometimes you just get like one that's just a little bit about the same size that can fit onto something else, so you can get a double boiler. I did learn recently that you want to avoid iron and copper containers. So stainless steel and aluminum, that's basically what I've been using when I look back. That seems to work really well. Having something for stirring is very useful. Knives occasionally in some cases when you want to scrape something. I really like this thing called the super scraper, which I think you can just get at the grocery store. I've been using it for years around the kitchen, and it's really, really good for scooping up little bits of wax and droppings and so on that get where it's not supposed to go. I also found that a really good way to actually clean something, let's say you have a bucket or a mold or something that has some sort of dirty wax in it, is just to get it nice and warm, and then use a rag, and the rag actually like just an old terry cloth towel ripped up or something like that. You could also use paper towels, but I try not to use disposable stuff as much as possible. So, and then something for pouring your wax into for cooling. So like some little molds or something would be good. I have a big stack of, I think they're 2-gallon size buckets that I got at a local ice cream shop a few years ago. And so some of them I just keep as a full bucket. And then there's a few where I've sort of cut a ring so that it's about a 2 or 3 inch round container, and then just use the ring for something else, or toss it away. The other thing that I'll show you in a really cool hack that I come up with, seen some other people do, and I've modified it slightly, is getting paint straining bags from the hardware store. And they tend to come in 1 and 5-gallon sizes. So the 1 gallon would be if you're really working with a small saucepan kind of a thing, but the 5-gallon is a really nice size if you're dealing with a stock pot. And it might be obvious, but just in case it's not, you really cannot use anything that you're using for beeswax also using it for other things in your kitchen. You just really need a new set of really everything. That really the only thing that I'm not able to keep redundant is the countertops and the stove itself, and so I just have to be very careful to keep those clean. So here's a lovely picture of what we're starting with. This is wax cappings, and some of these come from my hives, and there's another beekeeper in the club that occasionally I'll get some wax from her and go through and process that. And it is an interesting thing. If you're not getting a lot of wax and you don't really want to deal with it, you can always just, if you can throw it into a bag and put it in the freezer somewhere, if you have room in your freezer, that's kind of a nice place to keep the unprocessed wax for a while and not worry about it getting disgusting or moldy or anything like that, because there is honey, there's moisture, there's water, there's all kinds of stuff that could get a little bit bad. But we're trying to go from thing like this. And it is really interesting to look at this particular photo. This is not a photo of my wax that I've done. This is just something I found on the internet, but just look at the difference in colors there. And I've noticed that when I go over to Biofuel Oasis or something like that, I see what their wax is or what their candles are, and a big variety of colors. My wax, whenever I do it, for some reason, it comes out as a beautiful, bright golden, probably even more yellow than what you see in these photos here. But I have seen beeswax that's almost this kind of a tan brown. That almost seems like it's more common, in fact. Oh, Jerry, I'll add this to my vocal presentation. But Jerry just pointed out, a pound of wax requires about 8 pounds of honey production to make. Thank you, Jerry. So how do we get from the raw stuff to this nice? Let me just show you about a couple of other different ways of doing it besides the way I do it. One is a solar wax melter, and I'm really kind of fascinated by this, and I think that would be great. I do feel like my way of doing it, which you'll see, which uses a lot of water and time on the stove, does seem like it's kind of energy intensive as far as how much propane or natural gas I'm using up. Using the power of the sun would be really cool. And so I do notice that these solar wax melters like this, even though they look really cool and I'm sure they work great, especially if you probably live on the other side of the hills where you get a lot more sun or hotter days. But I did find something a little less expensive. There's just some other techniques that I found, some tutorials on the internet, and might be interesting if you want to try it. But a lot of them tend to involve using an old ice chest. And so here's one with a plate of glass or plexiglass along the top, and then this person just has a pot with the melted stuff, or with the raw wax, and just letting it get really warm in there and heat up. The ones on the right is segments of a video that I saw where they basically fill an ice chest and you put a aluminum baking foil tray at a slight angle and put some little holes in the bottom, and then you just put your wax that needs to be processed onto a paper towel and let it just very slowly work its way down and then drip into a little Tupperware container at the bottom. And in both cases, the wax looks beautiful when I've seen it. So I may actually do some experimenting with that later if I run across an old ice chest. So let me talk a little bit about my process. So I do, as I mentioned, I try to like constantly experiment and try to improve the process. So I recently came up with this idea of sort of pre-filtering the melting pot. And as long as you're careful about not getting anything that, the flames going over the edge of the burner, getting scorching anything like that, this could be really cool. Because basically what I want to do is sort of pre-filter to get the solids separated from the liquids. And so what you see there is all the gunk that I put into the middle there, but that's actually a paint filter along the outside. So what I first do is I just start filling up the pot with as much, pretty much as will fit. I'm not really cramming it in, but just filling it up. Just as a little aside, this is, approximately what's going to happen is once the wax has melted and separated, is that the beeswax, once it cools, the beeswax will be at the top. You'll have the slum gum, which is the really gunky stuff. And that's going to be, after it's cooled, it's going to be below the beeswax, although not perfectly separated, but pretty close. And then below is the honey and water, the mix of whatever honey was in there, and then water if you melt it with water, which is what I prefer to. Just big word of caution: don't ever try to put melt beeswax directly on a stove, on a burner, electrical or gas or whatever. Not a good idea. It really needs to be melted, either mixed with water in a decent, I don't know the exact proportion that it should be, but it should be mixed with plenty of water, because it's going to separate, right? Beeswax is basically an oil, and water, oil and water don't really mix. So when you put the oil, when you put the water in there, that's a great way to get the whole thing heated up. Or it can be in a double boiler. So yeah, pouring in the water. You're going to see it starting to melt, and so yeah, at the bottom of the image there, you can see little bits of melting. Some of it that's kind of the lighter color in the middle. It's actually, you can tell that it's kind of melted and then a little bit, and then solidified a little bit as more pure beeswax. But there's still a lot of stuff mixed in. Generally, at this point, I'll find that I can actually add more cappings. I can keep the thing pretty full, pretty useful, but there is a lot of air that's mixed in with all the wax cappings there. Yeah, adding plenty of water, but what do we want to watch out for? Make sure it doesn't boil over. Let's see. Let's see. Am I on the right side here? Yeah. They say a watched pot never boils, but that is definitely not the case here. I would say an unwatched pot will boil over. And so as you can see there, they're a little bit spilled down at the bottom there. And that's something where I need to keep it clean. Usually what I would do is just have a rag and soak it up while it's still hot and wet, but then afterwards there's probably going to be a little bit that I'll need to use that nylon scraper. So I like to use a laser thermometer to keep an eye on how hot the mixture is getting. And so 155 degrees Fahrenheit is more or less the melting point. And I have found that if it starts to get up like past 190 degrees, it's like, yeah, better back down on the heat, and just turn the fire off, let it cool down a little bit, keep it warm. But I have had this weird thing where I feel like when it gets too hot, that when it cools, it turns into these sort of sandy granules. That it's not the end of the world, because I've noticed that if I remelt that, then everything seems okay. But it's just a lot easier to just keep it at a good temperature, not let it get too much. So here you can see it is getting close. We're starting to see some of these like bigger globules where it's melted, but then sort of reformed. But you want to just keep stirring it fairly frequently, and you're going to see it's going to get down to about the size of a pat of butter that's left, and then that it's very, very close to being done. Slum gum, there's just a picture of that. You know, at this point, the slum gum is just going to look like mud. And you can also see what's underneath it, the light stuff. That's actually the nylon bag that because of the water and the water vapor, it's kind of pushing that up. So that's another reason you have to be careful to watch out for boiling over, because when the water turns into water vapor, it's trying to escape and it's sometimes pushing that nylon up. So want to be a little careful, but I'll show you that. So this is my hack, is that by very carefully gathering up the edges of the nylon after I've taken it off turned the stove off, I can start to gather it up, lift it up very carefully, and just let it sort of drain. I'll just sort of hold it up. And usually, you know, again, if the stove is off, it's not that big of a deal to hold the bag with the, you know, it's just a very wet bag of mix of slum gum, of beeswax, of water, and we're waiting for most of that to drain out. But the idea is to get as much of the solids out as. So then what I do is, again, I'm just trying to make sure not to waste any, is that I have a couple of these sort of old baking racks that I can put the bag between, and then I have some old weights that are sort of wrapped in newspaper, just something heavy, and that just pushes down on it into a colander, and that allows most of the rest of the beeswax to get pushed through, and then I'll save that. I can remelt that later. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm getting rid of the disposing of the slum gum. There's so little beeswax there, just a few little crumbs you can see on the edges, but it's really nice. I feel like I haven't really wasted anything. And I just pour it in the compost. Some people may have some stories about using it as a bee lure for your bait hives. I may try that again for next year, and I can tell you. Well, I'll tell you if I get any, if I catch any swarms, but I won't know if it really happened, if it was because of that or not. So this is what's left after you pull the paint strainer bag out. And so there's a couple of things you can do at this point. One is that you can then actually try to filter this beeswax out now that it's hot. And and because even though we have the paint strainer bag, there's still quite a bit of smaller particles that we do want to make sure don't end up in our wax. And in fact, we're going to see that. So I'm going to show you one alternate, which is just to take what's there and you just walk away from the stove and let it cool. And so how much slum gum do you think we managed to remove? Well, let's take a look. As you can see, there's a little bit of debris and slum gum that's at the top. Here's that chunk, and as you can see, it's really dirty on the edges, but there's just a little bit of kind of disgusting muddy layer. So we got most of it out. That was actually kind of nice. If you one reason you might want to do this first batch is that what's left is some water and honey. Now it's gotten hot, but it's water and honey. You could potentially use that for some mead. Usually what I'll do is if I'm trying to save some honey and water to make some mead out of, I'll actually rinse the unmelted wax cappings first in a 5-gallon bucket or something like that, like add in a bunch of water, swish it around quite a bit, and then drain that out. So that I can use that. So let's see. So here's where I do my work. Except for the actual melting in the kitchen, I take this down to the basement to do some filtering. Really not a good idea to work with melted beeswax in the kitchen, because if you have any kind of a spill, it'll just be awful to try to get up off of the floor. Also, do not work with melted beeswax outdoors. I mean, I've taken a container of beeswax outside, and if I'm not if I'm not quick to take it down to the basement, there have been days where suddenly the bees are like, oh, hello. And they're very interested in what they smell, because it smells really good to them, of course, just like it smells good to us. So this is just a photo of a technique I was trying for a while, which was this sort of like one bucket at the top of one bucket, and I would put in a little filter, and then it would drain down to another bucket below. But the problem was that a couple of times, fortunately, it was on the basement floor, not a big deal. I was even able to scrape it up and remelt it and filter it out. But yeah, I wound up having some spills that way. So what should we filter it with? Let's take. People talk about coffee filters for melting beeswax, and wow, it did not work for me. Maybe there's some brands of coffee filters that work or something like that, but I had a pile of large coffee filters that I actually got from a beekeeper when they were like, hey, here's a bunch of wax and supplies that the club can have, and some of those things wound up in our club candle making library. But there was a pile of coffee filters, and I tried one coffee filter, two coffee filters. It was amazing. I would pour the hot wax into that, and a little bit would drip through, and then it would just sit there, and I would come back a couple hours later and it had just solidified on top of the coffee filter. It just didn't go through. It wasn't working. So what I found for me, maybe there's some other suggestions, but it's just an old t-shirt. I think, yeah, it definitely needs to be a t-shirt that I'm not planning on wearing anymore. And I'll usually just kind of like grab a corner of it and run it around the edges of this bucket thing. I put some chicken wire to give it kind of a bowl shaped mold, of a general shape to go in, and I'll put some binder clips to hold it in place really well. But yeah, it seems like, I think it's a polyester or a cotton poly shirt is better than pure cotton. Your mileage may vary, but that seems like that does the trick pretty well. So this is a picture that my camera took of me pouring from a stock pot through the filter of my old, what was it, the Clusterfest volunteer t-shirt that I no longer need. Okay, just for fun, here's a time lapse. I set up the camera, and this is what happens when the mix of honey and water cools. It's just kind of fun to watch this happen. And you can see that there's a little crack that forms as it's cooling, because it's attached to it really wants to be attached to the side of the bucket there, but it's also shrinking as it cools. So what we wound up with was this. It's upside down from what we saw, but generally, so when you're mixing melting wax and water together, and then when you pour it out, probably the wax is generally on top, so it's going to be a lot of beeswax in that first pour. But then it's good to keep pouring until it's completely empty. So this one here, I did notice, by the way, mentioned that I did recently learn one way to not have it crack like this so much is just to let it cool down more slowly. And so I tend to put my buckets of wax on the floor of the basement really quickly, which is very cool. And so I've learned since then what a better thing to do is to put it not on the cold basement floor, and then also to put something on top, so a piece of foam core or cardboard or something to insulate it so that it cools down. It takes a lot longer to cool, but at least it's going to cool much more gradually and not have this quick shrinking and cracking and so on. So here's another, this would be like maybe the second bucket that I poured from that same batch. And as you can see, after it's cooled, there's very little beeswax there. It's mostly just honey and water at this point. So what I'll usually do is, grab or scoop off whatever is at the top there, because there's some decent wax in there, and then feed the garden. So this is what's happened after I've gone through a t-shirt filtering, but there's still quite a lot of grit there. I think this was actually the photograph of that one that we saw earlier, but there was, so it's turned upside down, but there's still a little bit of really, really, really fine slum gum at the bottom there, which is at the top of this photo. So really, you kind of want to go through and melt it again and really filter it up. this case. There's another reason why I'm interested in these solar filters is because at least what I've seen, it looks like just the one filter does a really good job. But usually this is where I'm ready to get the wax at something that I can pour into some sort of a mold. If I'm, either a measured mold, generally not going to try to pour directly from here into a candle because I really still want to filter it first. But notice the difference here is that now I'm melting this on a double boiler, so I'm not mixing any water. So there might be a little bit of water that's in it because of what's in the air, or when you're boiling and a little bit of steam comes up and maybe it can the little condensation. It's not going to be 100% beeswax, but it's pretty close. But as long as you can put the thing on a double boiler, I just have a slightly larger, kind of a not so tall, but a slightly wider diameter pot over a large stock pot that I fill up with water, and it might be the same pot that I was just kind of has some dirty bits of wax in it, but that's fine. I'm filling that up so there's plenty of water boiling to get it nice and warm, but and not worrying about it running out of water too quick. Again, using the thermometer, I have found it's possible that the wax can sometimes get really amazingly hot, even when you're double boiling it. So at one point, I remember measuring 191 Fahrenheit, and I thought, whoa, that is getting a little hot. I've heard it's better for it to be around 170 or so, and so usually what I'll do is just if I see that it's starting to get really hot, hopefully I'm not in too much of a hurry. I mean, you do need to sit around the kitchen all day. I mean, I basically just have a book with me and sitting on a stool in the kitchen because the time does go by kind of slowly. So yeah, you want that to melt, but not get. Here's a picture of what this looks like. Again, it needs to go through another filtering because, as you can see, there's some impurities that we're going to have to filter out, little bits that just somehow managed to get through the first filtering. But here I have poured it into. This is again the bottom of a little bucket, oh, let's see. Jerry just mentioned something interesting, that a solar wax melter can get way over 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Put a pan of water in your solar wax melter. Great idea. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying to play with that. But as you can see from this photo here, it's the wax is looking really nice. And okay. So now that you've done that, I'm not going to do much of a tutorial, but this is some of the end results of what you can get from processing wax. And here's some photos of some things that I've made. So candles is one thing you can do. That's they're really amazing. And this is by the way the color. It's pretty. I think it's depending on how well it goes through your computer monitor, but it just shows you how very yellow the final beeswax, at least the way that I'm filtering it, works. Over on the left is some pomade and some salves that I had made as well, which are a lot of fun, which is basically mixing beeswax and other kinds of oils so that it becomes much softer, and then essential oils and that kind of thing. So put in dye there's I know Man Lake and probably other beekeeper suppliers have candle dye that they sell. I've heard of people using crayons, but I've also heard that that's not such a great idea. That has some other, maybe makes the candle sputter a little bit. But I found that with when the wax is really yellow like that you can get greenish shades and red shades definitely, but when I try to make something blue, it ends up looking like that. Well, you can kind of see over on the lower ones on the left and the right side, it ends up looking like this kind of a dark green, maybe a pine green or something like that, which is, it's pretty, it's great if you want to, especially if you're trying to do make something look like an evergreen tree or something like that. So this would be a good time for me to plug the candle kit that the association has. And so this is something that I put together starting a couple of years ago. I think it started out with about half or 2/3 of this of the molds that you see here, and we've added a couple more based on people's requests. At one point I did a little survey to kind of like find out what were some of the molds that people were most hoping to get. But it ranges from the very small ones like you see in the middle, which is the tiny little votives that comes in a, let's see, did I bring? No, I didn't bring that one down. That comes in a set, yes, you pour a little set of 12. And those ones have little tabs for the wicks. And then, medium-sized, some smaller little flowery ones, some medium-sized ones. I think the detail of these things is really amazing. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and go back to my camera here so that you can see. So for instance, this is one that is I forget what it's called, a Fabergé egg or something like that, but it's just amazingly ornate. The way that these work, it's almost the same color actually, but it's a silicone mold. So basically you thread the wick through the bottom using this very large needle that we have in the kit, and then run the wick up to the top. So this is going to be the bottom of the candle. So when you pour the beeswax in, just melting after you've purified it, then it's really easy to just melt the beeswax on the stove. Pouring it in here, what I do is I hold the wick right into the center using some sort of a tab. Like I finally discovered one thing that works really well is bobby pins for the hair, because they just sort of clamp onto the wick and hold it there as long as the opening isn't too big. You can use toothpicks, popsicle sticks, all kinds of other things like that. That gets held in place. You let it cool for several hours. And then you basically split the mold open a little bit. Let's see if that's showing up. Okay, yeah. Some of them are easier to open than others. This one here, quite a few of them will have a rubber band going around it to keep it nice and tightly closed. Because when you're actually this particular one is like a little Winnie the Pooh honey jar, so there's a few little indentations where it's a little kind of hard to get out. So it's nice to split the thing open, be able to pull the thing open. As you pull the thing out, then this wick, I usually leave an extra. I'm trying not to make it invisible here. I try to leave an extra length of wick, maybe even several feet, so that then when you pull the candle out, the wick is now a little bit short. This one's ready to go, and then again you tie the thing, you put it in like that. I had this revelation a couple of years ago that these candle molds are kind of expensive. They tend to run about, I don't know, $30 each, and if you want to make candles, you probably don't want to just heat up and make one candle and then have to sit and wait for several hours and heat up another batch and make another candle. So my thought was, since I knew that the club had a library and the ability to lend out things like the extractor, that would be really useful to have a candle kit. So yeah, so what we do is let's see if I can make it not invisible. This is the lid, which I've made a very fancy. It's a big plastic bin now, but it just shows you pictures of what all the molds are. It's I think about 15 or so different molds. It also comes with several spools of the different kinds of wick, because each different mold different molds take different wick sizes. Comes with some spray release. It comes with a needle for threading getting the wick into the mold. Basically everything you need except for the beeswax and the melting of the beeswax. So that's the kind of thing that you have at home, hopefully. But yeah, basically all these things that you can use, and so you can make a big variety of candles based on what you have, and then pass it on to the next person. Usually the way we do it is that traditionally we blend it out from meeting to meeting. That's been kind of thrown out the window with our not in-person meetings. And so usually what'll happen is someone will just email me, and I believe it's candle@alamedabees.org. Maybe someone can correct me. And actually, Paula, you had your hand raised. Maybe you can tell me, because you've been you've been using it.
Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow. I wasn't responding to that, but I think I just email your personal email address, actually.
Yeah, and that's fine too. I just for posterity, in case it's not me sometime in the future. We do have a club specific specific address. And I did see a comment that Robin saying that we'd love to get some tapers molds. That's a great idea. I haven't tried that yet, and I know there's different ways. There's dipping, but then there's actually molds that just make the tapers. So I should put that into our list of next things to buy, because every year or so the club will approve a little bit more money to go add something to the kit. And I don't know, this is probably a good time. I mean, just any other questions, just either just start talking or raise your hand or something like that.
Yeah, Dan, I did have a question for you. I missed one little bit. I know you do the first strain with the paint strainer and then you pour it through a t-shirt. When you put the solidified wax back in the double boiler to get the last bit of goop off, what did you say you strain it through?
I just strain it through a t-shirt again.
Oh, another time through the t-shirt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay.
And each time you strain like through the t-shirt, I mean, you're done with that segment of the t-shirt. Like you can't really, once it's cooled down, you're not getting any more wax through there. It's not going to happen. Move it along and find another spot on the t-shirt or another t-shirt and strain through that. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, I guess yeah, I think that's all I can think of. I mean, if you have any other questions, definitely hang on to it. Oh, Beth, did you had a?
Well, it's a comment actually. I know you don't like to use disposable things, and I don't either, but a paper towel makes an excellent filter, and you only have to do it once and it comes out really pretty clean. That's after the slum gum or most of the slum gum. So like in my solar wax melter, I have this thing like out of metal and then a paper towel, and then I put the wax thing with the slum gum still on it, and it goes through. And now if there's any honey still in it, that'll go through too, but none of the slum gum goes through.
Great. That's actually a good idea. And I do have a roll of some industrial paper towel. I just remembered that I haven't tried using for that, but I've always been a little worried about, I wouldn't want to use it for the heavy duty straining, but since I'm using the paint strainer to get most of the slum gum out, then I think that would probably make sense for the finer stuff. So Andy.
Hi, we just had a question. This is actually Wendy, but we're both sitting here.
Okay.
We've done some candles ourselves, but we've had trouble with the figuring out what wick, because it seems like they don't get always a very strong flame, and they just kind of peter out. How do you figure out the wick?
The molds that we get from Man Lake that we have in our kit, they actually tell you what kind of wick to use. And so that's just like, first of all, like try it, hopefully it's in the manual. So I actually put into, I actually use a little Sharpie. So like this particular mold here is supposed to have the 60 ply, which is the slightly thicker one, which I wouldn't have realized, but somehow they want it to be the thicker one. Almost all the molds are something called, I think it's like 2/0 or something like that. It's kind of a medium-sized one. And then there's a much smaller one. I think it's called 60 ply, which I don't understand what all these numbers actually mean, but I can tell it's a much thinner wick, and it's used on the tinier candles. So I'm guessing if you are, if you're not sure, I would say take a look at, try to find a mold that's comparable in size and thickness and see if you can match that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment on the paper towel thing. If you're a camper or you have some sort of combustible stove or something that you use at home, those waxy paper towels make a killer fire starter.
Good point. Yeah. That is that is some good reuse. Yeah, I suppose you could do that with, even if you're just like putting newspaper down. I actually use when I'm making my candles, I put down a sheet of wax paper or parchment paper, like freezer paper sort of thing, in the kitchen, just to sort of cover things up. And that way, when I because I invariably will spill wax as I'm trying to like fill up the candle molds. A little bit gets off to the side. It's very easy to take off of that. So sorry, I just totally went into a different direction from camping, but trying to think about reuse of disposable material. It is pretty handy to have the paper that will sort of repel the wax, so that you can just peel the wax off and throw it back in and melt it again.
All right, any other questions for Dan?
I think we've run out.
Going once.
So I'm just gonna, this smells good. It is amazing. Like I don't notice it when I'm actually in the process of working on the beeswax, but when if somebody else walks into the room or walks into the house while I'm melting beeswax, they're so happy. They just love this. They just love the aroma. Well, I'm glad you all could do it, and I hope people will take advantage of the candle kit. I just got it back, I think from Paul actually, right? And added some new things to it. And I will point out it gets very, very popular during the months of around October, November into December. Everybody wants to use the candle kit and make candles right before December something. So if you do want to make some candles, I recommend you get into the waiting list or the queue very quickly, because we are getting close to that time of the year.
All right, one more time. Any questions for Dan? Well, I really do appreciate you doing a great presentation. Thank you for taking the time with us.
Happy to do it.